Hey everybody, I wanted to go ahead and make a new video. These sort of discussion type things tend to be the most fun for a lot of people, I think. It's not directly gameplay, and I certainly enjoy listening to this stuff the most. So, what I wanted to work on now is intrigue cards. I wanted to talk about the intrigue cards in the game. And the reason I wanted to do this is that I developed an opinion, especially at the end of the Rise of Ix ranked ladder before it switched over to Immortality, that intrigue cards were really the way that you won the game. They were extremely powerful, they were extremely impactful, and then also almost all of them were good. You could pretty much always, if you got them early enough, find a use for every intrigue card. So I want to talk a little bit about those, and I wanted to also rank them. So this is going to be a ranking of every intrigue card in the game from worst to best. We're going to start with the worst one. I want to know if any of you guys can guess what that'll be. I'm sure that you have a few different candidates right now, but for me, the worst intrigue card in the game is Counselor's Dispensation. This card just doesn't really do anything. It can be impactful to have surprise spice if you have a high council seat. You don't think I have enough spice to go to highliner. Well, guess what? I've got Counselor's Dispensation. I pop that. Now I can go highliner. Maybe I trick you. That's about all that you're going to get out of this card. The problem with Dispensation is that you don't get High Council all that often. Maybe you get High Council 40% of games. So in those other 60% of times, this is kind of a dead draw. And it's not enough of a reward to make you go High Council if you weren't going to already. It's not a very helpful card. The benefit's too low, it's too situational. I don't really have a lot nice to say about this thing. This thing is pretty useless, but most intrigue cards are good, and most intrigue cards, if you get them early enough, are good. And this is a good example where if you drew this card round one, you wouldn't be happy about it, but you'd say, okay, well, um, you know, let's plan a conspire route past Swordmaster, right? We get Swordmaster, then maybe we go conspire when we wouldn't have otherwise because we know we're going to cue that spice back later. You can always use this. It's just not very helpful. Next is going to be calculated higher. I don't think this card is worth it a lot of the time. Like, genuinely, sometimes one action isn't really worth one spice. I mean, usually it is, right? Because Imperial Basin's one spice, so whatever. But the thing is, like, that's a card that you're not revealing, right? Like, you only have so many cards that you play, and sometimes you want to reveal them. I think this card is just straight bad. It's an okay rate sometimes, and if Ilbon is in the game, then this card is effective because you're able to take the Mentat away from him, and it does help you if you have a BG deck going and you can chain together multiple actions. But in general, I don't think this is that effective, and sometimes I'd actually prefer to go to the Mentat space because it draws me a card. If you play Calculated Higher, you don't get the card draw. The only thing that this card has going for it is that it's very easy to trigger. So if your hand is full and you're worried about having your card stolen, then it's relatively easy to trigger this card. But sometimes it doesn't even work. If somebody else takes the Mentat, or if the combat comes up that gives somebody the Mentat, then you're not getting a whole lot out of this. So I think Calculated Higher is the second worst card. Next is Diversion. Diversion is normally one of the advantage of the plot cards is that plots, you can trigger them proactively so they don't sit in your hand and they don't ever become a liability. The problem with Diversion is that it has a very specific timing window that means that you can't trigger it whenever you want. And a lot of the times, the benefit that you would want to get out of Diversion is shipping down, getting extra troops to put in the combat, but you can't do that. You've already put 4 troops in the combat. You've already decided your deployments. I think maybe the timing will allow you to put the additional 2 troops in, but just in general, this isn't a very useful card. Shipping is powerful, but tying it to an ability like this means there's a lot of times that you're going to draw this card that you just can't trigger the ability. Or you'll trigger the ability in the last round on Highliner or something, and it just won't matter. So to say this card never matters, it does matter sometimes, but I don't think it's very good. The nice thing you can say about it is that, well, a single trip to Hardy Warrior, so long as your garrison's not empty, will get this to go off. But when you draw this with an empty garrison, you're feeling really bad. So, yeah, Diversion's not the best. Bypass Protocol 59. I considered putting this much lower. Bypass Protocol is maybe one of my most hated cards to draw because it's just so situational. But the reason that I have it at 59, above three other cards, is because I think in the right situation, this card is really powerful. This is basically Armand's Signet Ring, which is a good ability, and it has another effect tacked on where if you want to pay Spice, you can get a 5-cost card and put it on top of your deck. Or 4 cost, I suppose. I don't use this effect very often, but sometimes you can make cool things happen with it. You can put a really good card on top of your deck, then you can go draw cards, then you can draw the card that you just put on top of your deck. Kind of cool if you can make it happen. And it does allow you to snag cards like Talaxu Surgeon or In the Shadows out of turn, which can be pretty effective. After the first 3 rounds, I think this card becomes very ineffective. But there is an argument to be made that early in the game it has a good effect. So even though I think that this thing is really situational, it does occasionally do something. I can't tell you how many times I've used this card to pick up a Arrakis Liaison I didn't want just to get it out of my hand. Okay. Now we have Disguised Bureaucrat. I don't hate Disguised Bureaucrat. It shares a lot with Counselor's Dispensation in that it's a card that will just give you Spice on a situational condition. It's fairly easy to get the first condition on the card, but it won't trigger in the first couple rounds. So mid-game, gain 1 Spice, not a very useful card. And then late game, this card actually does become useful. If you can get the double DNA markers, this can help you steal alliances, and I do really like it at that point. But not every leader can finish the research track every game. Sometimes it just doesn't come up. And it feels bad to hold this until round 7 or 8 when you can actually use this effect. So a lot of times players will just pop this for the Spice in the mid game, and if that's what you're doing, this card's not very effective. 57 is Secret Forces. This is another one of the cards that relies on having High Council. I like the idea that we're buffing High Council by giving effects that benefit you if you have it. And I do like having the High Council, but these effects are infrequent enough that you're not going to say, well, I'll go High Council instead of Swordmaster because, what if I draw Secret Forces? Well, you're not gonna do that because most games you won't draw Secret Forces. But what I will say about Secret Forces, and the reason that I have it much higher than Dispensation, is that the effect is more significant most of the time. Being able to deploy 2 extra troops to the conflict, remember that you can deploy these when you go to combat space, is really quite helpful. This can help you win combats pretty easily. It can help you trigger things like the aforementioned diversion. So this is not a bad card under the if you draw this with High Council, this is actually a good card. It's just that it's, again, gating a card behind High Council is kind of rough, and it means that if you draw this as your 4th or 5th Intrigue card and you don't have a High Council seat and you can't afford a High Council seat, then you risk getting your really good Intrigue cards stolen, which is, I think, the big problem with it. Tiebreaker is number 56. This card is not great, but it has modality, which I think makes it decent. The daggers is basically you use the top half of the daggers whenever there's Chimurki in the game, where if Chimurki's in the game, then the bottom half Spice won't matter anyway. Now, maybe it will if the person who has Chimurki is coming in 3rd or 4th place. But if I have Chimurki or if my main competitor has Chimurki, then Tiebreaker's bottom half won't matter. So I use it for the top. Or sometimes if 2 daggers is all you need to clinch an important combat, then hey, it's worth it. It's the ability to use it for multiple things makes this card decent situationally. And then the bottom half, sometimes this will win you the game. It's hard to hold on to this and hope for that, but in the right situation, this could be worth a really, really lot. It's just it's just something that doesn't happen very often. So it's gonna sit in that hand, and you're probably gonna use it for the top half most of the time. It's not a horrible card. And if we're saying at 56 that the cards aren't horrible, then that tells you that entry cards in this game are just generally pretty good. Shadowy Bargain I have at 55. This could stand to go lower. This might be worse than Tiebreaker. It's kind of a similar effect where you've got a modality on it. You've got two different effects. What I think puts Shadowy Bargain ahead of Tiebreaker for me is that the ability to get a specimen proactively, this could allow you to, reach out and get a powerful Talaxuro card that you weren't going to get. Something like a You Slurp or a Stitched Horror or, you know, maybe even something minor like a Subject X. Like this card can help you do that, which I appreciate. The bottom half is a little bit annoying because planning around the Scarab, I mean, there's only two spots in the Scarab track where this matters. Where, okay, at the end game you get a surprise point. So maybe this is an end game point, but a lot of the time people don't end in those places. Like you would kind of have to design your game around getting to that spot. And the problem that Immortality has is because there are intrigue cards on the Scarab track in particular, it's very common for players to get their hands filled up with crap and get stolen from. And if I see this in this situation, I'm probably just going to use it for the specimen. You're going to know by the mid game generally if you're getting either 1 point or 2 points from the Scarab track. So this is not going to be something where a lot of the times you need it for the second Scarab point. Situationally, it could be a point, but most of the time you're just using it as a specimen, which is not a very impactful card most of the time. 54 is Quid Pro Quo. This card is interesting. I've used it effectively before. I mean, I've had this card give me 3 points before, but most of the time it's a dead card, in my opinion. Using like basically the trade of 2 spice for a faction influence on a space that you already have a agent on is mostly a bad transaction. It's not a great deal unless it's stealing you an alliance, or getting you to 2 on the guild early. So this card really becomes impactful if you can get 2 or 3 agents, or maybe 4 if you have like I guess like an extra mentat or something. But usually 2 or 3 agents is when this becomes impactful. It's just really hard to use, and having 2 spices and activation costs for a card is pretty heavy. So that's one of the reasons why I don't rate this card highly. It's a problem because it's hard to get out of your hand too, which is this wasn't something that I considered a big liability in Ix, but in Immortality, I think the ability to get cards out of your hand is increasingly important. So that hurts the card. Yes, it can steal alliances, and that's cool. Yes, it can help you get to 2 on guild, but there's much easier ways to do that than playing Quid Pro Quo. If you do see this card early, you can react by buying more fold spaces, and then you're going to be able to trigger this a little bit easier. But in general, I don't think the card is very good. So Rapid Mobilization is 53. I hate this card. I don't like it at all, but I will admit that it is useful in a lot of situations. It's kind of sort of like Quid Pro. It's like it's a card that's good, but it's not my playstyle. It can be handy when you go to places like Conspire, and that'll allow you to take big swings into combats and surprise people, which is really nice. This was probably a little bit stronger in base Dune when you had the space on the green space that gave you 4 troops. You could go do something like that and then surprise people with it. In general, I don't find that I have a lot of issues getting the troops into combats I need them deployed to anyway. I'm usually going for an early Swordmaster, and then I'm using the fact that I have 3 agents to put in the troops that I need. This card could be more impactful on a high council focused strategy where you're playing more aggressive and maybe you don't have all the actions that you need to get your troops in. And it can be useful in those cases, and certainly this can win you games sometimes. It can also be helpful with the Desert Ambush and similar type cards, but that's a pretty situational combo. It's very rare that you're going to draw this in Desert Ambush. So I don't rate it very highly, but situationally it can be quite helpful. 52, I have Cull. Cull is kind of a weird card because I do love trashing cards, but the Solari cost cuts against what this card wants to do. You want to play this card early because you want to, the way trashing works, the earlier you do it, the more it can compound, especially if you have cards in your deck that also trash cards. So you want to use this early, but early is when the Solari cost is most painful. Sometimes you can get this off in the first couple of rounds and you're happy with it. This card came out in Rise of Ix, and it was designed, I believe, to be used with the unload cards. But the problem that it has in Immortality is that Immortality didn't introduce any unload cards at all. So the critical mass of synergistic interactions that this card would have has been reduced. And it's more what you see on its face. It's less of, oh, I'm going to reveal my Esmar Tuek and get 2 spice and 2 Solari, and then I'm going to call him and get 2 more spice and more Solari and things like that. Or you're going to call your In the Shadows at the right moment to steal an alliance or something. Well, the problem is in Immortality, those cards are a lot rarer, and it's hard to get this card with those cards. So I think of this more as like an intrigue card that trashes. Um, it's really good to have sometimes, and it's fun, and it gives you more control than a Poison Snooper does because it can go from any zone. But the Solari cost for me is the big problem. Especially if you get this in the second half of the game, it's generally a dead card. It's nice if you have it early, but not so nice if you get it late. 51, I have Private Army. This is one of my least favorite of the combat cards in general. Although it is a combat cards are always going to be impactful, which is why I have this at 51. If you draw it, I mean, basically, the thing about combat cards is like if they win you a 2 point combat or a really important point combat, they can be extremely important. And Private Army does pull its weight, and it's higher amount of daggers than average. But the problem with Private Army is that because it has this activation cost of 2 spice, which is a significant cost, it's going to be hard to get it out of your hand. It's going to be hard to use it in the combats. So it's putting you at risk of having your card stolen. Sometimes you get multiple Private Armies, and that's really lame. Most of the time, I would rather just get 4 daggers for free than 5 daggers that I have to pay 2 spice for. Um, yeah, and then the other problem that you have with this card too is that if you play a Private Army and then someone responds by playing another combat card and going ahead of you, then you feel really bad because now you lost the combat and you lost your spice. Um, so it's a risky card that is hard to use. It's not horrible or anything like that, but there's a lot of feel bad moments where you play ambush, Private Army, you go up 9 daggers, and then your opponent responds by playing blackmail and then going ahead of you again, and then you kind of used your spice for nothing. So I don't care for Private Army. It's fine. It's impactful. Combats are competitive points, and you always want to have them, but it's not the best. Next is Expedite. Expedite is a lot stronger than the other shipping card because the 1 spice cost gives you a lot more flexibility on when you can use this. It's a little bit like it's actually exactly the same thing as Hundro's Ring. You can use this proactively to make a lot of combos, especially in Rise of Ix. I don't think this is an amazing card, but if you do have interstellar shipping access and you do have some bumps, this can be a great way to surprise people in the combat, or secretly steal a tech, or steal an alliance, get extra resources. Usually it's never going to cost you because you can always just take spice from the track, so it's not a bad card per se, it just isn't amazing. Economic Positioning 49. This card is basically on the bottom half the same thing as War Chest. It's a point for having 10 Solari, which is nice. Having 2 of these increases the critical mass at which you can say, well, having 10 Solari may well end up giving me a point because there's 2 different cards that could do that. The top half, I don't think of very highly. Retreating 2 troops for 3 Solari is potentially impactful. Getting this early could be very valuable if it helps you get a High Council seat or a Swordmaster or something. But you don't want to do it because a lot of times you really would rather have the bottom half. Maybe I could see myself using this if I was going to lose the combat anyway, like an opponent played daggers to go ahead of me, and then I could retreat for some benefit, which would be nice. It's just that ever since Immortality has released on digital, I really have not found myself ever actually using this ability to any benefit. So I mostly consider it a situational endgame point, which, to be fair, is still a point, so that's why it's at 49. Strong Arm at 48. This card is effective, but I seem to use it ineffectively. Losing a troop is kind of painful. And the thing about Strong Arm is it has to be this turn. It has to be when you play this card. So you can't use this on any faction like you might want to. So that's one of the things to me that makes this worse than like a bribery. But situationally, it can steal alliances. Um, it can be very strong, but also sometimes if you use it to try to steal an alliance, and then the other guy steals it instead because he, has some other better intrigue cards, then you're down a troop and you're down an intrigue card, and you kind of feel silly about it. So I rate this higher than Quid Pro Quo, but it's not amazing. It can be good with Baron though. It's very good. I will say if you're playing Hundro and you draw this in your opening hand of 2 intrigue cards, I would take this card ahead of other intrigue cards like 90% of the time. This is because you can basically use this to get round 1 interstellar shipping, which is really pretty incredible. It's one of the situations where this card is absolutely fantastic. And if this were just a Hundro tier list where we're just talking about what should you pick in your opening hand as Hundro Moritani, then this would be in the top 5 probably. But in a very general sense, it's not quite as good. Okay. 47 is Master Tactician. There's actually 3 of these in the deck. There might even be 4. There's a lot of Tacticians in the deck. I don't think this card is very good, but it is better than the Private Army. 3 daggers can oftentimes tip the scales and give you an extra point that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise from a combat, or some other type of stacking economic benefit. The bottom half of retreating the 3 troops doesn't happen very often, but I probably use it once every 10 or 11 games. It does occasionally come up. If you're moving 3 troops out into your garrison and you're going to use all 3 of those troops later, you are getting more strength. You're getting 6 strength than you would have gotten out of the top half. So the most common time I see myself using the bottom half is if I went for the stage 2 combat in round 7, and maybe I got to 20 daggers, and Tactician would let me get to 23, but then one of my other opponents gets to 25. So now there's no way for me to win the combat. So I might as well pull out with the Tactician, get an extra 6 strength for next round because the game's not ending in round 7 necessarily. And now in round 8, maybe I've got a better chance of winning the combat. So it's not a horrible card, but it's very ho-hum. Combat cards are always helpful though, so there's nothing bad to say about it really. Bendu Suspension I have at 46. This card draws you a card. It's fine. It's nothing special. It's basically a Paul signet ring. Almost every signet ring is represented in an intrigue card somewhere. What I like about Bendu Suspension is that it's never a dead draw. You're always going to get something out of this. It can help you sometimes buy useful cards early. It can act sort of like some extra persuasion. It can help you fix a bad hand. So there's a few good things you can do with this. It's a very usable. You're always going to be able to use it. It's just the impact is very low. So it's a sort of a mediocre card, but sometimes it can be really impactful. If this card draws you the yellow that you needed to hit Interstellar, or draws you the green you needed to hit Swordmaster, then it's really impactful. But a lot of the time, it's just going to give you like 1 persuasion or 1 dagger in the combat or something. It's not a crazy useful card. The option to pass your turn is interesting. This helps you stall sometimes, which is rarely what you want to do in Dune Imperium. This is not Twilight Imperium, but occasionally it is useful, right? Sometimes, if you want to see what other people are revealing before you deploy troops, or you want to see what other people are doing to have more information before you make a decision, then you can take this pass. I don't do it very often, but occasionally it can be helpful. 45 is Refocus. This is basically the same thing as Bendu Suspension. They're almost the same card. Refocus is a little bit stronger. I have seen situations where Refocus won somebody the game because, they had a Shifting Allegiances. They played it last round, and then I said, "Oh, okay, Shifting Allegiances is in their discard pile, so there's no way they can steal my alliance." And they have like 8 cards in their discard pile. And then they play Refocus. They draw 1 card out of their 10 card deck, and it's Shifting Allegiances, and they steal my alliance. So, Refocus can be really useful sometimes for recurring powerful cards in the discard pile. And I do think that the shuffle the deck part is the thing that makes this card interesting, but at the end of the day, it's basically the same thing as Bendu Suspension with a slightly more useful effect. Sometimes the shuffling your deck into the discard pile is a negative, but usually it'll help you out. 44 is Cannon Turrets. Cannon Turrets is an interesting card because while this card on its own is not very good, if the person that you're trying to beat in the combat has a Dreadnought, then sometimes this can be 4 daggers, effectively. Actually, 5 daggers in that case because they're losing the Dreadnought. If Romber's in the game, it could be 6 daggers. So this could high roll in the case where Dreadnoughts are in the game. The problem is the Dreadnoughts are not super great. So this card actually, despite only being only one card in the Intrigue deck, makes Dreadnoughts significantly worse because regular troops can't just randomly get kicked out of the combat like this. And sometimes you can lose the game off of cannon turrets. This card also significantly damages detonation devices. And that's the situation where this card is really strong, where you can deny somebody a point out of detonation devices by playing cannon turrets, which can be pretty painful for them. You can also kick somebody out of the combat entirely if all they have is a Dreadnought. So it's a weird card because it's not that helpful for the person who draws it usually, but it can be very painful for another person sometimes. So it's almost more of a hurt somebody else card than it is a help you card. But it can be helpful, again, if you're playing against a Dreadnought strategy. It can be, a 5-dagger swing, so it's not horrible. Harvest Cells I have at 43. Harvest Cells is interesting because it's a combat card, so it's hard to get out of your hand sometimes, but it's kind of just a free benefit. Unlike cards like Stage and Incident or Economic Positioning, you don't have to lose or retreat cards to get this. It's just a free benefit if you are losing them at the end of the combat. So it's basically, if I draw this early, it's basically like saying, hey, you get 2 free specimens, and maybe you can buy a Chilaxu card out of order. There's a lot of these in the deck, and they're usually decent to get, but this does feel really bad to draw when you have 1 or fewer troops in your garrison, because it's going to be a long time before you can use this card. And I do think sometimes this card will bait you into, if you're putting 3 troops into a combat just so you can use Harvest Cells and you're not getting anything useful out of the combat, I think you're actually worse off than if you hadn't used the card. You're better off spending your troops to get points out of the combat or economic benefits out of the combat than you are just trying to burn them on Harvest Cells. So you have to be careful about that. The other thing that's tricky about this card is that even though it gives you 2 specimens, you think that it costs you 2 troops. It actually costs you 3 troops. The 3 troops leading to 2 specimens is counterintuitive, and it can lead to situations where if you're not paying close attention, you can put 2 troops in the combat, think you're going to play Harvest Cells, and then you can't play Harvest Cells at the end of the combat, and then you get stuck with too many Intrigue cards. So it's a good card, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's a free benefit, and the specimens can translate to points or really good cards, but it's a little bit awkward to use. 42 is Double Cross. Double Cross is interesting because it's one of the only cards in the game that is explicitly political. It lets you target a player. I like this card because it allows me to leverage my threat assessment. It's also good because, somebody who has like a restricted ordnance, for example, who only has a certain number of troops in the combat, you can take out like 6 combat strength from that person out of nowhere. This card is really helpful when it allows you to cut someone out of the combat entirely. And the nice thing is that it does put you in the combat too. So it does have a cost, which is why I don't have this card above like an ambush, but it is helpful in that it's a 4-dagger swing, sometimes more if it's the only troop that a person has in a combat. And it can be used really intelligently to block someone's negotiate withdraw or to block someone's stage an incident. So I really like Double Cross, even if I think it's probably a medium strength card. It's almost always, if you draw this, you're almost always going to get to use it. You're never going to end the game with this card sitting in your hand, which is really nice. It's also very unique. 41, I have Ixion Probe. Ixion Probe is another one of those cards that you're never going to end the game with it in your hand. This card was better before they added Immortality to the ranked ladder because it was very easy, or it was much easier to use this card on like a X-Guild Compact or a Chome Delegate to get a ton of value. Some of my best games have been games where I bought Esmar round 1, drew Ixion Probe off of the combat, drew Esmar round 2, played Ixion Probe, got 2 Spice and 2 Solari out of nowhere, and when this card high rolls, it's super awesome. But most of the time, this is just a card consistency smoothing mechanic. But discard two, draw two is better than draw one most of the time, in being able to get you to where you want to be. Um, yeah, I would say in general, this card is just really handy. You're always going to get some value out of it, and then sometimes it will high roll and be super super strong. But with immortality out, that's less common because you have more cards that just don't have unload on them. Breakthrough is a handy little card. It's again, this is one of those cards where you're always going to get some value out of it. In the end game, this is a card draw. Before the end game, you can use this to trigger certain benefits like, the faction bump from the research track, or you can get trashes out of it. I'm never sad to see this card. It's pretty good. The only reason I have it at 40 is because there's a different Intrigue card that just gives you a Scarab for free. And that card is way stronger than this card. A lot of times the benefit of a research is that it gets you a Scarab. And the idea that a Scarab, you can just cut out the middleman and get the Scarab directly, well, okay, that card is clearly better than Breakthrough. But Breakthrough is nice. It's convenient to have. And I love it in the games I go scientific Breakthrough and get to the end of the track and get that point. So it's definitely a fun card. Next up is Water Peddlers Union. We're kind of going through, at this stage, we're talking about all the cards that give you some reasonable benefit, don't cost anything, you can play them anytime, but they're never going to be the thing that puts you over the edge. Yes, sometimes in a very tightly contested game this could matter, but these cards usually don't determine the game. They're just kind of nice to have. And Water Peddlers Union is a good example of that. Having one extra water is great. It's a good benefit. It helps you all the time, especially when people are trying to hostage the Great Flat and they don't know that you have this card, and then you can sneak in and steal some spice. But again, the benefit is kind of low. Like a lot of times in the late game, this won't do anything for you. If you Sonic Snoopers, a Hail Mary trying to get combat cards, you're going to be sad if you got this. It's still pretty beneficial, and it's overall, it's a really nice thing to have. So that's why I have it up here at 39. 38 is Poison Snooper. This card, I had to take a TTS screenshot of it because for some reason the Dune Imperium Assets website that is incredibly helpful does not have this card listed, so you'd think it wouldn't exist. But Poison Snooper is great. I like having this at all stages of the game. It's a super fun card. Basically, the only thing that the downside of this versus Cull is that you don't get to choose the card that you trash. But you draw the top card of your deck. If you like it, you draw it, and if you don't like it, you trash it. Sounds good. Early game, I can get my trashing going, I can get extra persuasion to buy good cards, and in the late game, you're never going to be sad about the extra consistency and the extra card draw. Maybe this helps you get a Spice Must Flow or something. So, Poison Snooper is a great card. I'm very happy to see it whenever I can, but it's not the most impactful thing ever. 37 is Windfall. Now, Windfall is interesting because you might think that, isn't Water Peddlers Union better than Windfall? I mean, water is usually better than 2 Solari, right? Well, they're probably worth about the same. But the important thing about Windfall is that it lets you cheat on Swordmaster order. It also lets you, sometimes it's going to be worth a whole action. If you wanted to go double smuggling on a leader other than Leto or Eliza or Beast, you're going to fall 1 Solari short of Swordmaster. And the nice thing about Windfall is it allows you to do that. And a lot of times, a player who is sitting at 8 Solari will not go Swordmaster first action because no other player has 8 Solari. So they can always just sneak in on the second action and get Swordmaster. So what you can do if you have Windfall early is that you can wait for that person to make that mistake, and then you can sneak in and steal their Swordmaster. And sometimes that can save you 3 rounds of actions from Swordmaster that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. It can really swing games. And even besides that, having this is a free Mentat, right? This is helping you with your High Council seat. The downside of this card is that it's not very impactful in the late game. Once you get to round 5 onwards, this card is not something that you want to see. If it weren't for the fact that the late game doesn't really incentivize Solari all that much, this card would easily be in the top 20 cards. But because this card is pretty much a dead draw at the end of the game, that's why I have it here at 37. 36 is Ambush. Ambush, I feel like, is sort of an index card. It's kind of a weather vane for all other combat cards. This is the simplest combat card in the game. There's no alternative modes, there's no costs. It is, hey, you get 4 daggers for nothing. Knock yourself out. This card's good. It's just good. It's going to beat a Master Tactician every time. It's going to be beaten by the Private Army, but you don't have to pay for it. And that's pretty impactful, especially when you're running up against that 4 intrigue card limit. You're almost always going to be able to find something useful that you can do out of this ambush. Usually it'll be worth a point from a combat, and that's oftentimes a point that another player is losing. So it can be quite impactful. Nothing really to say about ambush. It's a nuts and bolts card. It's very good. Now, counterattack is a variant of ambush. It basically says, okay, we're going to take ambush, but we're going to put some modality on it. And the interesting thing is that situationally, this card can be worse than ambush. If your opponent does not play like this, the problem is this card doesn't help you win a combat that you're losing. This card doesn't help you come from behind in a combat, right? Because if you're, let's say somebody's at 18 on the combat and you're at 17, well, they're not going to play any combat cards because they're winning. Why would they? So if they don't do that, then you can't play this card, and then you can't race ahead of them. However, this does really help you retain combats that you're already winning. If you're in the 18 person's position, this card helps you lock up a combat that someone was going to try to steal from you. So it's nice insurance policy on that. And then the other thing is the first half does make this a little bit better than ambush most of the time, in my opinion. The deploying 2 troops in the conflict is not a super huge impact. It's about as much as rapid mobilization most of the time, except it can't do the crazy swings that mobilization can do, but I'm very infrequently using it for that anyway. But this card helps you with your desert ambushes and your your master strokes and things like that. So this helps you also get into combats that you're not in at all. It's not a horrible card. It's got a little bit more flexibility than the ambush, and you can use the counterattack section if you were going to have your card stolen. So that's one of the things that puts it ahead for me by just a little bit. Next up is War Chest. War Chest is also an ambush variant, but I think the reason it's stronger than ambush, even though the combat section of the card is weaker, is because it also ends up giving you an endgame point. So this card basically tells you if you have Solari, no matter what, you'll get something valuable out of this. Either you get an ambush out of it from the top half, or you can get a point in the endgame. Better than economic positioning because it's easier to use, and I'd rather have daggers than the retreat. Also, the bottom half is the same thing. But what I like better about War Chest is that the 4 daggers is really impactful, and basically what this card tells you, like I said earlier, is that if you buy Solari, you will find a use for this. So if you get to 7 but you can't get to 10, no problem, you use it as a War Chest on the top half. Okay, 33, Sleeper Must Awaken. This is part of an interesting class of card where you have to spend resources to gain points. The ability to gain points is always going to be valuable, which is why this is at 33. But I do find that drawing them early can be kind of a significant road bump. You're kind of killing your economy by using this before the last couple rounds, because instead of the points don't matter until the game is over, right? But if you had instead gone to Conspire, then you could have given yourself long-term benefits. More troops, more intrigue cards, maybe a High Council seat or a Swordmaster, right? Or a technology that was useful. So it's a very useful card in the end game, but it's not very useful in the early game. It's kind of the reverse of a card like Cull or a card like Windfall. I'm very happy to see it if I get it from Snoopers, but I'm not happy to see it if I'm Handra Moritani. Usually, it's never a bad thing to have. It's just that I'd rather have something that snowballs me advantage than something that won't matter until the game is over. Still, it's a good card, though. 32 is Bribery. This card is really flexible, really handy. It's hard to use early because you want to get your Swordmaster, but in the late game, this is basically just a bump on any faction, which is incredible. It's great for stealing alliances. And in the early game, sometimes this will help you get to 2 on guild. This can help you, snipe interstellar shipping away from somebody else. It can help you in the late game with, if you do this on Emperor, you can get 2 troops in the combat on a combat action. You can mulligan for new intrigues. So overall, very strong card. I could go higher on it, but the 2 Solari cost is not nothing, and it does make it hard to use in the early game. Vicious Talents. This is another ambush variant, but Vicious Talents is, I think, usually a little better than ambush. It's interesting because in the early game it's weaker, so it's less likely to give you, a round 2 combat. But in the late game, it's a lot stronger, and a lot of times those 2-point combats are decided by 2 daggers or less. So, if this card, you load this up and you get the full 6 daggers and it wins you that 2-point combat, then, or even 3-point combat if it's economic supremacy, then you're going to be glad you had this. I like that this card scales with the game, and if you get it early, you can invest in research. It is sad if you didn't invest in research and you draw it late, but that's just how things go sometimes. In that situation, you'd rather have an ambush, but in the other situations, you'd rather have this. 30 Strategic Push. Strategic Push is really strong early. If you get this round 1, it's like a free windfall plus the ability to win a combat, which can be really, really impactful. In the late game, this tends not to do a whole lot, but it can swing games hard in the early game, which is why I put it in the 30 spot. 29, I have Glimpse the Path. Glimpse the Path is just really useful. Water and card draw, great things you're always going to want to have. And this card can really help you get Spice Mist flows, especially if the water that you get from this is the water that helps you hit Research Station. At that point, then you're drawing potentially 3 or 4 cards off this card instead of just 1. So it's really nice to have. It's easy to pop. You're never going to be sad to have this unless you're like, I don't know, Ariana and you have no spice. 28 is Infiltrate. Infiltrate is a really handy card. It lets you go anywhere, basically, and agents won't block you. It can be incredibly impactful in a lot of situations. Although I have had games where I already had a lot of infiltration. Maybe I had the Talaxu Infiltrator, maybe I had an embedded agent, and I just didn't really need this card. And that's why I don't have it in the top 20. But the ability to get to Interstellar Shipping after somebody else goes there, or the ability to get a Sword Master ahead of time, or to Highliner in the end game, there's always something good you're going to be able to do with this card. And you could, at the end of the day, you can just basically play this card even after you've already taken an action, just to get it out of your hand if you don't want to be stolen from. So that's one of the things that makes this card really great. Okay, 27. Dispatch an Envoy can also do that. It has the same modality where you can use it at the end of your turn to get it out of your hand. I think the best use of this card is to hold it for round 7, and then that way you're guaranteed access to Highliner as long as you save up the spice. But it can be handy just in general, giving you a little bit more faction access, a little bit more points. And it's more useful, in my opinion, in Mortality, because playing experimentations to faction spots, you got to play your experimentations in general if you want to maximize your value, and Dispatch an Envoy helps you do that. The fact that they only go to yellow can be a big problem, and it's just really useful. This card also combos really well with things like Leto's Ring. Combos really well with Desert Ambush. Can combo really well with cards that have really impactful agent boxes, which I think is really cool. Is really good with who else's Signet Ring? Like Hundro's Signet Ring could be good with this. I'm thinking of another one. Sorry, it doesn't really matter. You get the point. This it's consistently good, but hard to use occasionally, and not always. You're not always going to get a benefit out of it. If your deck is already really strong and you already have a lot of faction access, this won't do a lot for you. But if it doesn't do a lot for you, then you can use it for snoopers, or you can just burn it at the end of your turn. It's not a big deal. Okay, 26, Second Wave. This card is basically worth 6 daggers, which I think is really helpful. And it allows you to really sneak up on people and surprise them by putting extra units into the conflict. And notice that it says units. It doesn't say troops. So you can use this to get a dreadnought in. And actually, if you have detonation devices, this is kind of funny. If somebody uses cannon turrets on you and kicks your dreadnought out, you can second wave the dreadnought back in using second wave. So that's pretty funny. If you're running low on troops, though, this card is not as impactful. So that's one thing counting against it. But I think usually if you get it early, you can plan around it and make it really, really strong. 25 is advanced weaponry. I think a lot of people would put this lower than I have it. Um, Dreadnoughts are strong, but the Dreadnought board space is not. And the benefit of advanced weaponry is that it allows you to get Dreadnoughts without having to go to that board space. Right? If you think about the transaction, 3 Solari for 1 Dreadnought, that's basically saving you a whole agent action. And it is also a combat benefit because you can use it on a combat space to put more troops in and usually win a combat. So I think this card is really handy, and it's bailed me out in a lot of games, especially my Detonation Devices games. The bottom half with the 3 tech tiles, it doesn't come up that often. Occasionally, this is an ambush with sort of a weird contingency rider on it, but usually you're just using it for the top half, and that's well and good. It can be hard to get out of your hand if you're running low on Solari, you don't have your Swordmaster, things like that, but usually it's pretty nice to have around. 24, I have Gruesome Sacrifice. I have this card higher than Harvest Cells. Because it gives you more, and you can use this in response to losing a combat, to where the cost won't matter. So, if you are winning a combat and then somebody plays an ambush or vicious talents and goes ahead of you, you respond by Gruesome Sacrificing, you lose nothing, and you get a Scarab and 2 Specimens, which is a really impactful benefit. Again, same as Harvest Cells, I don't know that you want to go into combat just to use this. But the thing is, if you draw this early, you're going to eventually get some value out of it. Eventually, you're going to play this. And Scarabs are worth points. So, also remember that, like, three Specimens is another Scarab point. So, this is almost 2 Scarabs, which is really impactful. So, Gruesome Sacrifice, overall, pretty good card. 23, I have Finesse. Finesse is an awesome card. This allows you to trigger the Alliance benefits out of order. This allows you to steal alliances. This allows you to protect alliances. In the situation where you're not using the top half, or you don't think you're going to use the top half, this can also win you combats using the daggers. It's not common that you're going to use it for that, but sometimes, hey, this will win you a combat. Like, it does happen quite frequently, and usually that's worth more than trying to steal the alliance. At worst, you can always just play this, go down one faction, up the same faction, and it won't cost you anything. And if you don't like it, you can always mulligan it at Bene Gesserit by going down on Bene Gesserit and then back up on Bene Gesserit again, and then getting another Intrigue card. So, overall, pretty handy card. 22, I have No Other Ways. This is the lowest rated of all of our +1 influence on a faction card. These cards are great. They're all pretty much in the top 25 cards. The reason that I have this lower, we'll talk about when we get to the other ones. It's not bad to have. I tend to find that the Fremen Alliance is the one that tends to get settled the easiest. Usually, if Baron's in the game, he's just got that alliance. Beast usually goes for it heavily. So if I'm playing someone like a Kaz, maybe this makes a difference, maybe it doesn't. This can help you get Mimic Orders. This can help you get plans within plans. But a lot of the times, I'm just playing it to get out of my hand. Still, though, this is oftentimes half a point, and I respect that quite a bit. Blackmail 21. This, on its face, it looks similar to Private Army, but I think this card's a lot better than Private Army. You can pretty much always activate Blackmail. You can't always activate Private Army. If it's going to win you the combat, a lot of times you'll do this. And this cost can be immaterial in a lot of situations, where Private Army's cost is always going to be something you have to consider. If you have an alliance locked up and nobody's competing with it for you, you can go down on that alliance. If you have, a random bump like from No Other Ways, you can go down on that to use the Blackmail. You can go down on a faction to re-trigger their alliance benefit. You can, if you have spy satellites, this basically costs you nothing. There's a lot of benefits to Blackmail, and it very frequently wins you combats, so that's why I like it. It also can combine easier with other combat cards. If you have a Private Army and a Blackmail, you're probably going to be able to play them both to win a round 7 combat, whereas having 2 Private Armies would be much harder to trigger. 20, I have Secret of Sisterhood. This card is better than No Other Ways, but not by a lot. I value this card more for a couple reasons. One, because the Bene Gesserit Alliance is less contested. As long as In the Shadows is not in the game, then Bene Gesserit tends to be the least contested alliance, but it's a very valuable alliance. and the benefit of getting the Intrigue card from the track is more valuable, in my opinion, than the water that you would have gotten from the Fremen. So that's one reason why I prefer this card. I also think it's easier to steal an alliance with this than it is with the other ways, just because the Fremen gets settled fairly early, typically. 19, we have Urgent Mission. We're in the top 20 now. This just recalls an agent. I mean, besides just being an extra action, this card has a lot of benefits. It lets you hit a single space twice. A mistake I see very frequently with this card is players playing it after they take their first action and then letting that space stay open until their next round, where oftentimes players will steal it from them. You play this before you take the action to go to a space twice, usually. Sometimes you can play this just to get more actions, and that's good too. But go Interstellar. Pass. On your next turn, recall the agent off of Interstellar, go there again. Tends to be the most backbreaking and common way to use this. But you can also use it with, Research Station twice if you have a lot of water, or Carthag twice. What's really brutal with this card in Immortality, sometimes players will just go, especially Barons will do this, they'll go just crazy with intrigues. They're going to go to 5 or 6 intrigues and just say, screw it. People can only go to Secrets once. So, yeah, maybe they steal one of my cards, but I'm not going to stop using my ring just because somebody might steal my cards. Okay, go to Secrets. Steal from Baron once, maybe from some other guy too. On your next turn, Urgent Mission, recall, go back to Secrets again, steal from Baron a second time. Can be really impactful. Double Hardy Warriors. I mean, the thing about this card, I think, is it allows you to double up on spaces for synergy. But, of course, like I said, it can always be used just to get a little bit extra value, maybe an extra experimentation, which is not bad either. 18, I have Recruitment Mission. This card looks innocent and simple, but I think it's more powerful than it looks. The thing about Recruitment Mission is twofold. So the first is that a lot of times, at worst, this is a Spice Must Flow. Right? It's not that hard to get to 8. And weirdly, it's considerably harder to get to 9 than it is to get to 8. I feel like you get to 8 more often for whatever reason. So, at its worst, this can be a Spice Must Flow in the end game. But in the early game, this can help you get a critical card. This could be your 5th Persuasion for a Talaxu Master, or for a Thufir, or, for a 6th Persuasion for a Gurney. And the ability to put those powerful cards on top of your deck can be really impactful. So I love this card as sort of a deck building assistant. But again, even if you're not doing deck building, you can use it for Spice Must Flows. So it's pretty great. 17 is Favored Subject. This is the second best of the faction bump cards. Favored Subject has 2 things going for it that in a vacuum would make it the best, but there's some reasons why the other one's better. The first thing it has going for it is the Emperor sucks. That seems counterintuitive, but you have to commit actions to these tracks in order to get these benefits. And the Emperor is the track that you want to commit the fewest actions to. So drawing a Favored Subject allows you to, play to the other factions instead. That's the first benefit. The second benefit is if you go to Arakeen and you play Favored Subject, or you go to Highliner and you play Favored Subject, and you get the Emperor Alliance, or just the 4th influence on the Emperor, that's 2 extra troops, and you can put those in the combat immediately. So a lot of times this card ends up being like a Hidden Forces, the card that we saw that gave you troops from High Council. It doesn't require you to have a High Council seat, and it gives you half a point. So it's much better than that card. I'm always happy to see a Favored Subject. 16 is Grand Conspiracy. This is the weakest of the endgame point cards that can give double points. Certainly. I think it's the best designed of those cards, but it is the weakest. Cheesable is of the opinion that if you draw this card a lot of the time, you should just Sonic Snoopers it, because it's so hard to get all of its benefits. And I do agree, it's very difficult to get even 1 point from this card. But I think when you draw this card early, you get a point from it consistently. And there's some leaders like Leto and Yuna who generate so much Solari that it's not that difficult for them to get the 2-pointer. I've gotten both points from this card from Yuna twice now, and I think I've also gotten them from either Ariana or Leto as well. So it can definitely be done. You have to play around his conditions. But I don't think it's hard to get the first point, right? If you get a high council seat, which is the main thing this card's requiring out of you, then getting a Spice of Flow shouldn't be hard. So that's 2 of them knocked out. You're probably going to get 4+ influence on 2 factions just by playing the game. And then that's a point. Or the 2 Dreadnoughts is really the thing that kills this card, unfortunately. But it's not impossible to get that either. So I like this card a lot. It just demands a lot of Solari. To be honest, a lot of games this is a dead card, but the possibility of swinging you 2 points is really impactful. Okay. 15, we have To the Victor. This card is a snowball. The thing that makes this card so strong is it's half of a highliner, and that if you draw it off of combats like Cloak and Dagger, or the Spice Raid card that give you Intrigues, you can immediately play it in the same timing window that you win the combat, which is really, really strong. And this can potentially let you snowball the game. 3 spice is a lot, and if you get it early, eventually you're going to win a combat. Now, I'm not the best at combats. I would say that's one of my weaknesses as a player. So I have had games where I drew this card and I never got to use it, and that is really a bummer. And that's the reason why this card is in the top 10. But I do think it's a very significant card to have, especially if you can draw it off of an early card draw. 14, we have Chome Shares. I think this card is significantly stronger than the Sleeper Must Awaken. 7 Solari is about as difficult to get, maybe a little bit easier to get than 4 Spice. But Spice is important during the entire game, and Solari is not. In the Endgame, you could spend 7 Solari on this card and it wouldn't affect you at all. It wouldn't change your board position whatsoever. Whereas Sleeper Must Awaken, that Spice is important for your tiebreaker. That might cost you on tiebreaker. That might cost you, a shuttle fleet that you could have used to get an alliance. That might cost you, Spice that you needed for your private army or whatever. So I think Chome Shares a lot better, and I think that it wins. I think that Chome Shares wins you the game much more often than Sleeper Must Awaken does, but it's a very good card. The thing is, because it has this cost, if you draw it early, it is kind of going to sit dead in your hand until like round 6 or later. But if you can avoid getting stolen from, it is very impactful. 13, I have Allied Armada. I think this is one of the best combat cards in the game. It is 2 more daggers than the Private Army was for the same spice cost. The thing that makes it harder to use is that you have to have an alliance. Generally speaking, you're going to have 1 alliance most games. There are games where you can't use this card because you don't have an alliance, but in general, this card is much better at winning in-game combats. This card is frequently just spend 2 spice to get 2 points, which is really, really impactful and can swing games. So I think this card is probably the best combat card. There might be one better, but I think this is the best of them. Reinforcements. Okay, this is a better combat card. So Reinforcements has a 3 Solari cost. That's not nothing. You do sometimes have to work to get that 3 Solari, but you can do it during your action phase, but generally speaking, you do this on reveal. People are very surprised by this typically, and it blows them out of the water. 6 daggers is significantly better than what most cards can muster, and the fact that it's troops and not daggers means that you're less vulnerable to effects like double cross. This allows you to use Negotiate Withdraw more frequently. This works very well with Stage and Incident. It's overall more effective. The only thing hurting this card, and maybe hurts it a little bit more in Immortality, is that in Immortality with the specimens, you are more tightly constrained on your troops. And if you run out of troops, this card is worse than like an Allied Armada. But what puts us ahead of Allied Armada for me is that the cost is less material. It's more likely you're going to have 3 Solari you're not using than 2 Spice. And the Spice would hurt you on this tiebreaker, whereas the Solari mostly will not. You can spend this in the action phase to not get stolen from. Yeah, I think it's overall just a little bit better. 11, I have Study Melange. This is a new card. I don't have a ton of experience with it, but it is part of a duo of cards that reward you for finishing the DNA track. 3 spice at the end of the game. You get a point if you finish the DNA track. Pretty easy. In-game points are just always going to be valuable. They always swing games. This is not impossible to do, especially if you get a Talaxu Master or a Bene Talax Researcher. And then the top half giving you a spice is nice because it means that you can burn it early if you have to, right? And as a baseline, 1 spice is not terrible. This might help you hit selective breeding when you couldn't have otherwise, or help you get a tech that you couldn't otherwise afford. So I like this card. It's always going to be useful. The top half is not super impactful, but you're always going to get something out of it, which you can't say about Allied Armada, for example. Number 10 is its twin, Talaxu Puppet. This card is basically the same, except it requires a High Council seat instead of 3 spice. I think that it's harder to get a High Council seat than it is to get 3 spice a lot of the time. But sometimes you draw this card after you have a High Council seat, and it's just a free point. And I think that the upper half of the card is more useful. The 1 Persuasion can be a point from a spice must flow more frequently than the 1 spice from Study Melange can be a point. So generally speaking, you're getting a point from this card either way, either from an SMF or from the bottom half, which is what makes it so useful to me. Number 9 is Demand Respect. This card is really strong. This card snowballs games and puts games away early. You're almost always going to have a time when you can use this, and like to the Victor, this card can be triggered on a combat that you won that drew you this card. So if you win the 3 spice and 1 intrigue card combat and you get Demand Respect, you immediately have enough spice to use the bottom half of Demand Respect. This card steals alliances. This card gets you guild access. This card gives you faction benefits. This card is worth at a minimum a point if you're spending the spice. This is crazy powerful. And if you don't have the spice, you can always use it for a single bump. It helps you hit plans within plans. It helps you hit mimic orders. It's really, really impactful. I played a game with Black Shadow that's up on my channel right now recently, where he got this card in round 1. He got it off of Carthag's Beast on round 1. Used the 2 spice, went up on guild, had uncontested guild access for the rest of the game, or at least for several more rounds, and just crushed everybody. Incredibly lucky card draw, and this is going to be useful even in other circumstances as well. Okay, number 8, Illicit Dealings. I hate this card. This card is like completely broken in Immortality because the Scarab track gives you intrigue cards. So on more than one occasion, I've seen players at 1 Scarab play this card, get another intrigue card, and then play a second Illicit Dealings that they drew from the first Illicit Dealings. And just rake in points and end the game early because they have Illicit Dealings. This card costs you nothing. You can play it whenever. It mulligans you into even more intrigue cards. It parlays itself into more advantage. It's consistently worth points. I do not like this card. I think it's too powerful, and it ends games too quickly. Now that we have the ladder going to 11, I mind it less. But when the game was going to like 9 points, a lot of times Tessie would draw 2 Illicit Dealings, and it was like, okay, that's game. Like, yeah, she's got it. I mean, she's got 2 free alliances. She's got 4 points on factions. She's going to end the game in round 6 because she got 2 Illicit Dealings. So this card is really powerful for any leader, but it's just kind of free value. Number 7 is Water of Life. This might seem strange because a lot of the other cards that draw cards, like, Refocus, were so far behind Water of Life. But I think Water of Life is a difference in magnitude that becomes a difference in kind. Drawing 3 cards out of nowhere, and yes, it has a cost to it, but drawing 3 cards out of nowhere, this is often the card that will get you, if not a Spice Must Flow, which it frequently is. If you have Kinds, this could be 2 Spice Must Flows, but this card lets you get Kwisatz Haderach a lot of the time. This card lets you get Jessica. This card lets you get Chum Directorship. This basically allows you to sneak up on the crazy powerful Haymaker cards, and it changes the game. And you can pretty much always... Oops, sorry. That was my mouse kind of flying out of nowhere. This card will change your game, and the cost is a cost, but it's not so restrictive that you can't plan for it. It's good early. It's good late. It's a great card. Okay, 6 is Machine Culture. I might have this rated a little bit too high. I find that this is consistently a point. It's easier to, in my opinion, to get Machine Culture to go off than it is to get the Puppet or Melange to go off. Maybe we could switch the position of these, but a lot of times I'm getting tech anyway. And if I don't think I can hit the requirement, the ability to buy a tech out of order can be really impactful. This card is very effective with the Shuttle Fleet, helping you steal alliances. This card is effective with invasion ships to help you win a combat. Can be good with, you know, any pretty much any card that has an on purchase benefit can help you buy spy satellites when that is contested, and it helps you steal mimic orders before you normally would be able to. So I think Machine Culture is really good. It's almost always going to be worth something strong, and a lot of times that in-game point does decide games. Number 5 is Guild Authorization. On its face, this card is worse than the bump with Emperor. The problem is this card completely warps the game in the first 2 rounds based on the way that Rise of Ix works. If you're not playing Rise of Ix, this card's probably not that good. But if you draw this as Hundro on round 1, you're just probably going to win the game. If you draw this on most leaders in round 1, you're probably going to win the game. This card can steal alliances. It can give you 3 Solari from the track. It's almost always useful unless the Guild Alliance has already been settled. And there are situations where somebody already has the Guild Alliance locked up, at which point, maybe this card is not worth being in the top 5. But it's game deciding so frequently that's why I have it as a top 5 card. 4 is Charisma. Maybe this is me rating it too highly, but I think 2 Persuasion is almost always very useful. This card lets you reach for cards like Gurney. This card lets you steal cards like Chome Directorship or Jessica or Kwisatz. And at worst, it's worth a point because you're almost always going to be able to use this to get a Spice Must Flow. And you can play at the start of the round, and you can retain the benefit until the end of the round. You're never going to have this card stolen because you can always just drop it early. Incredibly useful card, almost always worth a point. Sometimes worth many points from valuable cards. Corner of the Market, I have it number 3. I think this was accurate in Ix, where it was fairly easy to get 2 points off of this, and this was kind of a freebie. In Immortality, Spice Must Flows are significantly less common in my opinion. In Immortality, this card goes down several spots in my experience. But in base game and in Ix, I think this card is incredibly strong. It wins games. It manages to find its way into Ilbon's hands a lot of the time. The problem is having 2 points on the end game is just completely game deciding, and it's rewarding you for doing something that would give you points anyway. If you get this in the Holtzman engine, you're basically not going to lose. If you get this in a Spy Satellites, you're basically not going to lose. If you get this early, you probably win the game because you can plan around it. The thing is, if you have 2 Spice Must Flow, you already have 2 extra points from that, right? So, you're talking about 4 points from 2 SMFs potentially, or 3 SMFs. The thing that is weird about this card too is that it's not really interactable. You can't really stop somebody from pursuing this, but it is more interactive than the card we have at number 1 because you can buy Spice Must Flows on the margin to take away that second point from a player, which I think is kind of cool. Don't trash your Spice Must Flows because it does impact this. This card does not count how many did you buy this game. It counts how many are in your deck at the game's end. So I've won games more than once because somebody did not get their corner of the market point, or I did get my corner of the market point based on somebody trashing SMFs. Extremely impactful card that rewards you for winning the game anyway. 2, I have Staged Incident. Staged Incident is basically a free point. It's basically a free point. You are going to have so many chances to use this. The best case scenario for this is, you were going to win a combat, and then your opponent plays a private army, and they spend a bunch of resources to beat you, and then you reply by using Staged Incident and get a point anyway, right? Pretty strong. That's the first scenario. The second scenario is
you win a combat by so much, you overcommit to a combat so much using Highliner or whatever, that you can stage an incident and still win the combat. Um, I think the thing that makes this card number 2 for me is just that it's almost always a point. Pretty much the only time that this is not a point is if you draw it in like the last round or the last 2 rounds and you don't have time to plan around it. Um, this card wins games quite frequently. Um, and the fact that you can use it at any time in the combat allows you to usually make the loss of the 3 troops not material. Yeah, so it's a really strong card. Now we're gonna go to number 1 here, and I think you already know what it is. Everybody knows what number 1 is, right? I mean, it's the most obvious card in the deck. It's the most game warping. You can place your guesses now if you're not sure, but ready? It is Plans Within Plans. This card is completely broken. I would like to see a statistical analysis of how often the person who drew plans is the person who won the game. I think it's pretty often. This card is part of the reason why Baron and Tessie are the strongest leaders in the game, because it reinforces the idea that playing to factions is what's going to win you the game. The first part, the thing is, the first point is trivial to get for the most part. The only problem with this is it doesn't work with spy satellites. The games where you get this in Mimic Orders, this is a 3-point swing. I mean, you can just look on my channel. I mean, God, what, like a third of my games that I've won, maybe 20% of the games I've won, I drew Plans Within Plans. It decides games more than any other card. It is usually 2 free points. Yeah, you get to plan around it a little bit, but as long as you can draw it before like round 7, you can generally get this to go off, at least for 1 point. And it's not interactable. Unlike Corner of the Market, where players can say, I think he's got CTM based on his play patterns. Maybe he's buying Spicemas Flows really early, and maybe he's got CTM. With Plans Within Plans, yeah, there's maybe a tell, but you can't do anything about it. Like, if you see that somebody has CTM, you can shift to Spicemas Flows yourself, try to have more than them. But you can't stop somebody from getting Plans Within Plans off. Maybe you block them on factions a little bit, but it's just not interactable. So this is the strongest card in the game. It decides games very, very frequently. A lot of times I've considered throwing out my recordings because they included Plans Within Plans and cheapened a victory that I was going to get. So yeah, that's the strongest card in the game. To recap here, our top 10 is Talaxu Puppet, Demand Respect, Illicit Dealings, Water of Life, Machine Culture, Guild Authorization, Charisma, Corner of the Market, Stage Incident, and Plans Within Plans. Notice that almost all of them give points. The exception would be Charisma, which gives points indirectly. Guild Authorization, which gives long-term value and also maybe points. Water of Life, which probably gives you an SMF or a really, really strong card, which of course is points. Illicit Dealings, which is points. Yeah, and Demand Respect is also points. So, yeah, cards that give points. Anyway, that's about 1/6 of the deck, too. So realize that Intrigue cards are good, and that's the end of my list. Let me know what you guys think, and thank you for listening.